Imagine this. You come home one morning, coffee still warm in your hand, and there's a tow truck backed up to your driveway. Hooks already on your car. Not just any car, though. The one your father built with his own hands. The one you spent every Sunday tuning up together. You rush over thinking it's a mistake. But the driver? He's got paperwork, official looking, stamped by the HOA president herself, claiming your car is illegally stored and needs to be removed immediately. And as you're standing there trying to process it, she walks up, clipboard in hand, sunglasses on, acting like she owns the whole neighborhood, smug, calm, completely untouchable. The cops show up ready to impound your car until they run your name. And suddenly that smirk on her face disappears. Because the man she's trying to intimidate is a retired police chief. But here's the real twist. The woman who tried to enforce the rules was about to get exposed for running one of the biggest scams our town had ever seen. What started as a petty HOA argument turned into a full-blown criminal investigation. Let me start from beginning. Frank Dillon wasn't the kind of man who looked for trouble. After 30 years in law enforcement, he'd seen more than enough of it. All he wanted now was peace. Quiet mornings with his coffee, tending to his small patch of lawn, and the deep, satisfied rumble of his late father's 1968 Mustang warming up in the driveway. That car wasn't just metal and paint to him, it was memory. Every scratch, every dent told a story. It was the last thing his dad worked on before he passed, and to Frank, it felt like keeping him close. His neighborhood was one of those planned communities, clean streets, perfect lawns, and a homeowners association that prided itself on maintaining standards. Most people didn't mind. They just paid their dues, followed the rules, and went on with life. But every HOA has that one person who takes authority a little too seriously. That was Karen Truman. Karen wasn't elected. Not really. She sort of installed herself into the role of HOA president, like a self-appointed queen on a cul-de-sac throne. She had the kind of smile that said, "I'm doing this for everyone's good," while her eyes silently added, "whether you like it or not." To most neighbors, she was a nuisance, always peeking through blinds, jotting notes, and dropping off warning letters about flower beds or paint colors. But to Frank, she was something else entirely. It started small. One afternoon, Frank found a crisp white envelope taped to his door. Inside, a formal notice of violation. Apparently, his Mustang was aesthetic clutter. The rule she cited was buried deep in the HOA handbook. Something about vehicles of historical make requiring garage storage. Frank chuckled at first. The Mustang was clean, polished, and didn't block anyone. It was his pride and joy. But the letter didn't feel like a suggestion. It felt like a warning. He walked down the street and found Karen pruning roses in her yard, dressed like she was expecting a magazine photographer. "Karen," he started calmly, "got your note. I think there's been a misunderstanding. That car's registered, insured, and it's my daily driver. It's not a project vehicle." Karen smiled, that polite, sharp smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, I know, Frank, but rules are rules. We have to maintain the community's image. Maybe you can keep it in the garage. I'm sure you understand." Her tone made it clear she wasn't asking. Frank's garage was already filled with tools, boxes, and memories. That Mustang wasn't just a car, it was a part of his home. He politely declined. A week later, another letter appeared, this time with a fine attached. $50, then another. Then one marked, "Final warning." Frank ignored them. He wasn't about to pay money for the privilege of parking on his own property. That's when things started to turn personal. Karen began showing up unannounced, snapping photos of the car, sometimes pretending to inspect the sidewalk for cracks. Neighbors noticed. A few whispered that she'd been targeting others, too. A garden statue here, a mailbox color there. But no one ever stood up to her. Frank could have confronted her again. But he'd learned long ago that you can't argue with someone addicted to control. So he kept his cool, documented everything, and went on with life. But Karen didn't like being ignored. One evening, Frank returned home to find a bright orange sticker on his windshield. Unauthorized vehicle, towing scheduled. He stood there for a long moment, the paper fluttering in the breeze, that old instinctive heat rising in his chest. She'd crossed a line now. He marched down to Karen's house, knocked on her door, and waited. When it opened, she greeted him like she'd been expecting company. "Oh, Frank," she said sweetly. "Hope you got my notice." "We've had some complaints." "Complaints?" he asked. "From who?" She shrugged, all innocence. "Let's just say a few concerned residents want the neighborhood to look Consistent. That car doesn't really fit the aesthetic. Frank clenched his jaw but stayed calm. Karen, that car's older than half the houses here. It's registered, it's clean, and it's staying right where it is. You understand? Her smile vanished for just a second, the mask slipping. We'll see about that, she said quietly before closing the door. For a while, things went quiet. The fines stopped. The letters stopped. Even Karen's daily walks past his house seemed to disappear. Frank thought maybe she'd finally found a new target. Until the morning, he heard a diesel engine outside. He stepped onto his porch and froze. A tow truck was backing up to his driveway, metal chains clinking as the operator crouched down to hook the Mustang's front tires. "Hey!" Frank shouted, jogging down the steps. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The driver looked up nervously. "Got an order from the HOA, sir. Vehicles reported as unregistered." "I was told it's not yours." Frank blinked, stunned. "Not mine." "Are you kidding me?" And then, right on cue, Karen appeared, clipboard in hand, her voice dripping with authority. "It's been reported stolen," she said calmly. "We have to follow procedure. Nothing personal." Frank stared at her, trying to process the sheer audacity. "Stolen? That's my father's car. I've owned it for 30 years. Karen crossed her arms. "If that's true, I'm sure the police will sort it out. They're on their way." She had no idea who she was dealing with. When the patrol car rolled up, Frank greeted the officers by name. One of them had been a rookie under his command years ago. The driver's nervous glance said it all. Something wasn't right. The officer stepped aside with Frank, reviewed the documents, and confirmed the registration. Then he turned toward Karen. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "this vehicle is legally owned and registered to Mr. Dillon. You made a false report." Karen's confident expression faltered. I was just following HOA procedure." Frank reached into his wallet and slowly unfolded a small leather badge holder. "Procedure?" he said, holding it up. "You might want to review which laws apply before you start." "Inventing new ones." Her face drained of color when she realized what she was looking at. The badge of the former police chief of the county. The officers exchanged knowing looks. The tow truck driver quickly unhooked the chains, muttering apologies as he backed away. Karen stood frozen on her walkway. Speechless for once, Frank just smiled, calm, controlled, but with that quiet edge only someone trained in law enforcement could carry. He turned back toward his porch, the Mustang gleaming behind him. But if Karen thought that was the end of it, he said later, she was about to learn what happens when you pick a fight with someone who knows every law you're hiding behind. For a few days after the tow truck incident, everything went quiet. Too quiet. Frank had been around long enough to know that silence wasn't peace. It was strategy. Karen had been humiliated in front of the entire neighborhood, and someone like her didn't just swallow that kind of defeat. She'd regroup, plot, and come back twice as nasty. Frank knew it. Gina, his wife, knew it. Even the mailman had that nervous look now, like he didn't want to get caught in the crossfire. It started subtly. One morning, Frank found a bright yellow violation slip tucked under his windshield wiper. Unauthorized overnight parking. $100 fine. He chuckled, shaking his head. The Mustang hadn't moved in days. He tore it up and tossed it in the bin. The next morning, 2 more tickets. Same handwriting. Same smug tone. He checked the HOA portal online. No records of official fines. They were fake. Someone had gone to the trouble of printing, laminating, and stamping imitation citations just to mess with him. Gina leaned over his shoulder, reading the slip. "You think she's sitting at home making these things herself?" Frank smiled. "Wouldn't surprise me. She's got that arts and crafts meets dictatorship energy." By week's end, the harassment had escalated. Someone, and by someone, he obviously meant Karen, started marking his driveway with chalk lines. Each line labeled with measurements like encroachment and property extension violation. Frank took pictures, printed them, and slid them into a growing folder labeled Karen's Greatest Hits. Then came the drone. The first time he noticed it was during breakfast, a faint buzzing outside the kitchen window. He stepped out and looked up to see a small quadcopter hovering over the yard, camera pointed squarely at his house. Gina groaned. "Oh, for crying out loud. Is she really spying on us now?" Frank sipped his coffee, smirking. "Let her. I hope she gets a good shot of me flipping her off." But secretly, he was already planning his counter move. That evening, Frank adjusted the irrigation system he'd installed years ago. He replaced one of the sprinkler heads with a motion sensor model, one that could detect movement from several feet away. The next morning, like clockwork, the buzzing returned. The drone hovered lower this time, camera tilting toward his front yard. Then, pshh, a jet of cold water erupted from the sprinkler, nailing the drone dead on. It spun out of control, sputtered, and crashed straight into Karen's prize rose bushes. Gina couldn't stop laughing. "Well, I guess she's getting her footage up close." Frank tried to play it off as coincidence when Karen stomped over an hour later, soaked drone in hand. She was livid, ranting about property destruction and a violation of HOA privacy clauses. Frank tilted his head, calm as ever. "Privacy clause? You mean the one that doesn't apply to airspace over private property?" She froze. He continued, "You might want to check subsection 14B of the FAA's hobbyist drone policy." Karen blinked, clearly not expecting a retired police chief to quote federal aviation law. From that day on, the drone disappeared. But the war was far from over. That weekend, Frank and Gina sat on the porch, sipping lemonade as a truck pulled up, the HOA landscaper. He began unloading supplies for Karen's garden renovation. The same garden that, ironically, was technically against HOA rules due to non-native species. Gina nudged Frank. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" "Oh yeah," he said. Poetic justice. They spent that afternoon reading through the HOA handbook, the same rule book Karen had weaponized against everyone else. And there it was, buried in the fine print. Homeowners are prohibited from planting or cultivating non-native species that disrupt local vegetation or attract invasive pests. Karen's entire rose garden, her pride, her obsession, was imported hybrid floribundas from Europe. Frank didn't even need to report it himself. He just left a few printed pages from the rulebook tucked under the windshield of her car, highlighted in neon yellow. No signature, just a quiet reminder. Rules are rules. By the next week, a county horticultural inspector showed up. Not at Frank's request, but apparently someone else's. Word travels fast in neighborhoods like that. When Karen was told her roses might need to be removed pending inspection, Frank didn't gloat. Not outwardly, anyway. But he did hum the theme from the good, the bad, and the ugly while trimming his hedges. The community started noticing. For the first time in years, people began waving to Frank again. Some even stopped by just to check in, but their smirks gave away what they were really doing, enjoying the show. The HOA meetings grew tense. Karen, once the queen of the clipboard, now faced pushback from the very people who used to fear her. Rumors spread about her drone antics and the false tickets. Someone even posted the sprinkler footage online. HOA Karen gets instant karma, and it went modestly viral. Frank didn't post it, but he didn't mind watching karma do its work either. Still, he stayed vigilant. He knew how people like Karen operated. They didn't back down. They just changed tactics. That change came one Friday night. Frank's friend Tony, who lived 2 houses down, showed up for their usual poker game. They sat around the table, trading jokes and stories until well past midnight. When Tony finally left, he waved, climbed into his truck, and headed home. The next morning, Frank got a call. "Frank," Tony said, voice shaky. "You awake?" "Yeah, what's up?" "My truck's gone." "What do you mean, gone?" "I mean gone. Not towed. Not repossessed, just gone. I called every impound lot, nothing. And guess who was outside when I noticed?" Frank already knew the answer before Tony said it. Karen. Standing at the edge of her driveway, pretending to water her dead roses. Frank's stomach tightened. This was different. The fake tickets, the chalk, the drone, that was petty harassment. But this was a crime. He hung up, grabbed his folder, now thick with evidence, and looked out the window toward Karen's pristine white house. The blinds twitched. She was watching him. Frank turned to Gina. "That's it. No more warnings. This just went from HOA nonsense to something darker." She nodded slowly. "You think she's behind it?" "I think she's more than just behind it," he said quietly. "I think she's part of something bigger." He slid the folder into his briefcase and grabbed his keys. "That's when the line between harassment and crime disappeared," he said later. "And I realized Karen wasn't just a bully. She was a front." For Frank, the morning after Tony's truck vanished felt eerily familiar, like waking up back in the force, just before a big case broke wide open. Except this time there were no badges, no partners, no official jurisdiction. Just a retired cop, a furious wife, and a neighborhood full of secrets. He sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee, the morning light streaking across stacks of HOA notices and handwritten notes. Gina stood by the window, scrolling on her laptop, eyes narrowing at something on the screen. "Frank," she said slowly, "you're gonna want to see this." He looked up. "What did you find?" She turned the screen toward him. On the monitor was an online payment record, HOA fines, supposedly issued by Oak Ridge Property Management, the same company Karen always cited in her emails. But the transaction details told another story. "Every fine," Gina said, "is processed through a third-party billing company called Metro Collections LLC. Frank frowned. "Never heard of him." "Neither had I," she said, clicking a few more times. "But get this. The address listed on their business registry? It's the same as a towing yard in Eastfield. The one Tony mentioned when he was checking for his truck." Frank leaned in, heart thudding. "You're saying the HOA fines are being funneled through the tow yard?" "Not just funneled," she said. "Look, same owner listed on both companies. Charles Truman." Frank froze. The name hit him like a cold gust of wind. "Truman," he muttered. "As in Karen Truman?" Gina nodded grimly. "Her husband." The revelation twisted everything they thought they knew. Karen wasn't just a nosy HOA president, she was part of something bigger, something organized. Frank sat back, rubbing his temples. So all those fake tickets, the citations, the towing threats, they're part of a racket. She finds people, her husband's company collects, and the cars conveniently disappear into their own lot? Gina nodded. "It's a perfect scam. Legal enough on paper to look legit, but dirty underneath." Frank sighed. "This isn't an HOA dispute anymore. This is fraud, grand theft, racketeering, maybe even money laundering." That night, Frank called someone he hadn't spoken to in years, Sergeant Mike Davis, an old colleague from the force. Davis picked up on the third ring. "Frank Dillon, the legend himself. I thought you traded in your badge for bird feeders." Frank chuckled. "Yeah, well, peace and quiet didn't last long. Got a situation here. HOA level ugly. HOA ugly," Davis said. "That's a new category of hell. Trust me, this one's different," Frank replied, and explained everything. The fake tickets, the missing truck, the Truman connection. Davis listened without interrupting. When Frank finished, there was a long pause. "All right," Davis finally said. "Off the record, I'll help. But we gotta be smart. If what you're saying's true, it's bigger than a neighborhood feud." "Off the books is fine," Frank said. "That's how I've been living lately." A few nights later, they met in a dimly lit diner off Route 12. Rain tapped against the window as Davis slid a folder across the table. "Got what I could," he said. "Tow yard's legit on paper, but they've had 3 prior complaints, all lost vehicles. Owners say their cars were towed and never returned. Police reports just disappeared." Frank flipped through the files. "Disappeared?" "Yeah," Davis said. "One of them was logged into the system and deleted the next day. No trace." Frank's jaw tightened. "Karen must have had someone on the inside." Davis nodded. "Wouldn't surprise me. Oakwood Development's got deep pockets. And deeper connections." Frank looked up. "Oakwood? As in Oakwood Development Group?" "Yep," Davis said. "They've been buying up foreclosed homes all over the county. Guess which HOA handles most of their neighborhoods?" Frank leaned back, realization dawning. Oakwood Development. Karen's HOA, Truman's towing lot. It was all one machine, built to bleed homeowners dry, one fine at a time. That night, the 2 men drove out to the Eastfield storage facility. Rain slicked the road and the air buzzed with tension. Davis's old Chevy idled near the gate, lights off. "Security cameras?" Davis asked. "Couple," Frank said, scanning with his flashlight. "But they're motion triggered. We stick to the shadows, we're fine." The gate was chained, but Frank found a loose section of fence near the back, just wide enough for them to slip through. Inside, rows of storage units loomed in the darkness. A faint hum of electricity filled the air. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked. They moved quietly, flashlights low. Unit 47. That was the address Gina had traced from the billing system. Frank found it halfway down the aisle. Heavy padlock. New. He knelt beside it, pulled a small lockpick from his pocket. "Old habits die hard." "Still got the touch," Davis whispered. "Never lost it," Frank muttered. The lock clicked open. They pushed the door up slowly, metal groaning against metal. The beam of Frank's flashlight swept across the interior and both men froze. Inside were cars, rows of them. Classic Mustangs, modern SUVs, sedans, some stripped for parts, others freshly detailed. Each one had different license plates taped to the windshield. Frank's stomach dropped. They're changing VINs. Davis crouched by a table littered with paperwork. He lifted a sheet and whistled low. Forgery templates, DMV stamps, the whole setup. This isn't a tow yard, it's a chop shop. Frank grabbed a folder. The top page had a familiar signature, elegant, precise, unmistakable. Karen Truman. Her signature was on a vehicle release form. She'd signed off on multiple transfers, all legally approved under HOA authority. Davis shook his head. Jesus, she's laundering stolen cars through homeowner violations. Frank exhaled slowly. Every fine, every tow, every storage fee, all of it's part of this scam. They photographed everything. The plates, the documents, the cars. But when Frank suggested hauling it all in, Davis stopped him. Can't, he said. We didn't get a warrant. This is all off the books. You bring this in now, it's inadmissible. They'll walk. Frank's jaw clenched. You're telling me we just found a whole car theft ring and can't do a damn thing? Davis sighed. Not legally. Not yet. They left the facility just before dawn, exhausted but wired. As they drove back, Frank stared out the window, mind racing. Gina was waiting on the porch when he got home. Did you find anything? Frank nodded, handing her the camera. Everything. And nothing we can use. She frowned. How is that even possible? He sank into a chair, rubbing his hands together. Because the truth without a warrant is just trivia. It's not justice. Not yet. Gina was quiet for a moment, then said softly, So what do we do? Frank looked up at her, eyes hard but focused. We make them expose themselves. We had all the proof in the world, just none we could use. Unless we could make them expose themselves. By the time the sun rose over Oak Ridge, the quiet little neighborhood was a powder keg waiting for a spark. Frank knew it. Gina knew it. And Karen? Well, she was about to find out the hard way, that her own arrogance was about to undo everything she'd built. It had been 3 days since Frank and Sergeant Davis had discovered the stolen car operation at the storage yard. 3 long days of restless nights, whispered plans, and phone calls that had to be phrased just right. They had all the evidence in the world, fake VINs, forged HOA records, signatures linking Karen directly to the scheme. But none of it mattered without one thing, a legal chain of custody. They couldn't just hand over photos from a midnight break-in. They needed a clean, public, documented event that tied Karen to a crime, and that's where Officer Miller came in. Miller was young, barely out of the academy, bright-eyed, polite, still believed the system always worked the way it was supposed to. Frank had trained officers like him once, back when his own badge still carried weight. When Miller showed up in the neighborhood that morning, clipboard in hand and confusion on his face, Frank saw an opportunity. Morning, officer, Frank greeted, walking down his driveway with calm confidence. You here for the complaint? Miller nodded uncertainly. Yes, sir. I was told there was an issue with a vehicle being stored illegally? Frank smiled faintly. Oh, I think there's more than an issue. Come on. You might want to see this firsthand. Across the street, Karen Truman was already outside, wearing her usual smug expression and clutching her phone like a weapon. Behind her stood a tow truck idling, its hydraulic lift already positioned near Frank's Mustang. You can't keep this here, Frank, she snapped, waving a stack of papers. You violated the same bylaw 3 times this month. The board voted. It's being impounded. Frank stayed calm, hands in his pockets. That's funny, Karen. I checked the HOA bylaws last night. There's no clause that says a registered operational vehicle can't be parked in one's driveway. Karen's face twisted. Oh, there's an amendment. I wrote it myself. Miller frowned. Ma'am, can I see that document? Karen thrust the papers toward him, impatient. Of course. The board gave me full authority. While she spoke, the tow driver started backing up, cameras from a few neighbors' phones already recording. Karen barked orders like a general in battle. Lift it! Get it on the truck! He can pay the storage fee if he wants it back. Miller raised a hand. Hold on, I need to confirm this first. But Karen ignored him. No need. HOA authority supersedes? Actually, Miller interrupted, his voice firming. It doesn't. He flipped through the pages, brow furrowing. This isn't an official city form. And this bylaw amendment, it's not notarized or registered with county records. Frank could almost see the color drain from Karen's face. Before she could respond, another set of headlights appeared down the street. 2 black SUVs rolled up silently, and out stepped Sergeant Davis and a half-dozen officers. Morning, folks, Davis called out, flashing his badge. We got a warrant to search a property connected to the Oak Ridge HOA storage facility off Eastfield Highway. Karen blinked. What? What are you talking about? Davis held up a printed warrant. We got an anonymous tip about stolen vehicles. Signed, sealed, and approved by Judge Latham at 8:42 this morning. Frank hid a small smile. The anonymous tip had been his doing, routed through a lawyer, clean and untraceable. Within an hour, the Eastfield facility was swarming with police. Drones hovered overhead, lights flashing against corrugated steel walls. Reporters had already caught wind. Someone from the sheriff's office must have tipped the local news. Frank and Gina watched from the sidelines as cars were hauled out one by one, tow truck after tow truck. Each vehicle was cataloged, VINs checked, titles verified. It wasn't long before Davis called it in over the radio. We've got confirmation. Stolen vehicles, forged tags, and HOA documents in the same storage unit. It's her handwriting on the releases. Back in Oak Ridge, Karen stood frozen on her lawn, surrounded by cameras and curious neighbors. Mrs. Truman, Davis said, walking up to her calmly, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, falsifying documents, and facilitating grand theft auto. Her mouth opened, then closed. This is ridiculous! I am the HOA! Not anymore, Davis replied, snapping the cuffs. The neighborhood erupted in quiet murmurs. Some people filmed. Others just shook their heads. After all the fines, the threats, the years of intimidation, the Queen had finally fallen. By the end of the week, the entire Truman network unraveled. The HOA treasurer, Barry Madsen, was arrested after confessing to handling Karen's off-the-record payments. The towing company's owner, her husband Charles, cut a deal with investigators, trading testimony for leniency. Oak Ridge's HOA was dissolved by unanimous vote. Every resident's bogus fines were voided. The neighborhood, once terrified into silence, was suddenly alive with laughter and barbecues again. And Frank, he didn't gloat. He didn't post on social media or give an interview. He just wanted his peace back. He spent one quiet afternoon polishing the red Mustang, sunlight glinting off the hood. Gina came out with 2 lemonades, smiling softly. Feels different, doesn't it? She said. Yeah, Frank replied. For the first time in years, it actually feels like home again. She looked at the car. You think you'll ever forgive her? Frank chuckled lightly. Forgive? Maybe. Forget? Not a chance. He took a sip of lemonade, eyes thoughtful. You know, when she first tried to tow this thing, I wanted to lose it. But sometimes the best revenge isn't rage, it's patience. Letting the truth do the talking, Gina smiled. And in your case, a little concrete justice didn't hurt either. They both laughed quietly. As the camera of life pulled back, neighborhood kids riding bikes, dogs barking, flags fluttering. The Mustang sat gleaming in the driveway, a silent symbol of victory and resilience. Because in the end, Karen's empire of fake power had crumbled under its own weight. And Frank, he didn't just win a fight. He reminded an entire neighborhood that calm, calculated truth beats chaos every time. Sometimes, the best revenge is staying calm and letting concrete justice do the talking. If someone tried to take what's yours, would you fight back? Or let them tow it away?